This is the Whitelaw PLLC Tailgate Show on Lansing's Big Talker, 1240 WJIM and Classic Rock 94.9 MMQ. Brought to you by Whitelaw PLLC, Shaheen Chevrolet, Price Right Auto and RV, Blue Moon Belgian White. WJIM Lansing and Classic Rock 94.9 WMMQ East Lansing, Town Square Media Stations. This is the Whitelaw PLLC Tailgate Show on Lansing's Big Talker, 1240 WJIM and Classic Rock 94.9 MMQ. Today's broadcast is brought to you by Whitelaw PLLC, Shaheen Chevrolet, Price Right Auto and RV, Blue Moon Belgian White. Now, let's talk to the Dean of Sports, Tim Staudt, and offensive-minded host, Beanie Howell from the Price Right Auto and RV Studios.
Welcome in. It's the Whitelaw PLLC Tailgate Show. Live from those Price Right RV Studios on 1240 WJIM, Lansing's Big Talker, and Classic Rock 94.9 MMQ. Also brought to you by Blue Moon Belgian White, Shaheen Chevrolet and Cadillac, MSU Healthcare Sports Medicine. Speaking of, pardon my voice. Doubting Industries, Schupan and Sons Recycling Industrial Services, Gravity Smokehouse, and MSU Federal Credit Union. I'm Beanie. You can hear me weekdays on the game 7:30 a.m., 3 to 6 p.m. My show's called Offensive Minded, joined, of course, by the Dean of Sports himself, Tim Staudt, heard weekdays 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. on the game 7:30 a.m., and also sports director for WILX News 10 in Lansing. Of course, you all knew that. And Brock Palmbos, also heard weekdays 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Staudt on Sports on the game 7:30 a.m. We want to remind you but this tailgate show is interactive. You are more than welcome to join the discourse. Here's how you can do that. The phone number is 517-300-4263. And each of our two stations here have a free app you can get wherever you download your apps. And you can use that to listen live, take it wherever you want, and call in through the main menu. And actually, you can even send in like free text messages to both stations by clicking chat in the main menu of those apps. Again, that's just searching for the 94.9 WMMQ and or 1240 WJIM app, free and available wherever you get your apps. All right, boys. Well, we've got something to actually chew on today after what happened to Michigan State last week in Seattle. Obviously, an embarrassing and very upsetting loss for the fan base, 39-28. If only someone on this tailgate show had warned us that Michigan State historically was so poor on the West and that the Big Ten in general just doesn't play well out there in the regular season. But I digress. I just wanted to get my shots in early because I was the only guy that picked Washington last week. So with that in mind, what went down there, how bad the pass defense looked again, is it a must-win today, Tim, against Minnesota?
I think it's a bigger game for Minnesota. This is the sixth year for P.J. Fleck as the Minnesota head coach. It's the third year for Mel Tucker. I think if Fleck is going to show that he actually has changed Minnesota, a school that has never been in the Big Ten West divisional title, to get to the championship game, in a division that's considered widely as the weaker of the two, nobody's asking him today to beat Ohio State, Penn State, or Michigan. They're asking him to beat last year's third-place Big Ten East team, Michigan State, who's coming in with a 2-1 record and is unranked. So to me, if Minnesota, who's 3-0, has had 3 lopsided wins at home, is going to make a statement that, you know what, this is not just another Minnesota team that's going to go 7-5 and go play in the Fleabag Bowl against somebody and maybe win it and finish 8-5 or 7-6 and call that a great year, then a game like today, to me, has got to be a statement game for Minnesota. In Michigan State's case, I think I would pick Minnesota to win if it was in Minneapolis. They play better there. The fear I have for Michigan State today is Minnesota has a veteran team. They're older players. They've been around. I think they're well aware of what I just said that they've got from their own people. I think they've heard that they haven't played anybody. They've only played at home. They have not played in East Lansing since 2013, so that doesn't involve any of these people. Fleck was here when he was 32 years old as a coach at Western Michigan. Minnesota hasn't won here since 2006, but of course they haven't played here very often. So, that said, the logic is going to be, well, State's playing at home, and they've heard all week what a horrible loss it was at Washington. So, they're all going to, the week was where we're going to get everything fixed, blah, blah, blah. And I guess we'll find out whether they did, or what you saw last Saturday exposed a team that struggled in those areas a year ago. But despite those struggles, camouflaged the problems by finishing 11-2. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, for sure. It is remarkable that what they did last year with the affectionately branded pass defense by Mel Tucker, dead ass last, finishing last in the country, and still won 11 games. That is remarkable. I still don't know how they did that.
I don't either, because a number of those games, if you go back and review them, including Michigan, absolutely went right to the wire. To Mark D'Antonio's point, game of inches could have gone either way, win or lose, but they weren't going to win the Purdue and Ohio State game. So those two losses were pretty well in stone. So, the 11-2, I mean, if you're a fan, it's fantastic, and you're ranked and all that. If you're maybe someone who doesn't have a rooting interest, you look at that and say, boy, they got a lot of football breaks along the way last year. I do think, though, that having three of their defensive starters out, I don't think they would have won the game with those guys there. It might have been closer. But on a team that's kind of thin in depth in some areas, especially on defense, when they lose key players, they don't have a linebacker, they don't have a defensive back.
Darius Snow, Jacob Slade, and Xavier Henderson.
Yeah, when you don't have, that's 3 out of 11. That's 27%. My batting average stats are correct. It's 273, 3 for 11.
You're good with percentages.
So that's 27%. And, the guys behind them, and like you said, and rightly so last week, even though I poo-pooed that a little bit, I think, like you said, you used the stats to say when any of these Big Ten teams in Michigan State go 3 time zones to the West, statistically, in the recent history, it hasn't worked out well. I don't think anybody thought it was going to be 29-8 at the half and 36-14, but that's what it was. And frankly, I think that score of 39-28 is misleading. If Washington hadn't shut it down and softened it up a little bit on defense at the end of the game, I think it could have been far worse than what it was.
Yeah, and Michael Penix Jr. got dinged up a little bit in the second half, and he wasn't at 100%, and they got very conservative.
Well, he had 400 passing yards by the time the third quarter was over.
So he could have had easily, if the game was on the line, I mean, could he have had 500, 550? I mean, where would it have ended? Because, I mean, there were a couple of their calls, even when they're trying to take the air out of it on the fourth down, you have a quarterback sneak. And I mean, there were twice, and then he overthrew a kid wide open in the second half that was walking into the end zone. So, I mean, you look at it, and I'm not completely sure the part of Michigan State's comeback again was because, don't let anybody get behind you, put the receiver in front of you, don't get called for defensive holding, all that to keep the clock running. And State had a little more offensive success. So,
but let's talk about that a little bit more, though, about the pass defense, and because things that happened in that game, as I was watching it live, I thought, holy bleep, this looks worse than it did last year, because it wasn't just guys getting beat, it was guys running clean, uncovered through the secondary and behind it, which I guess that happened sometimes last year, but usually it was guys getting beat on soft, like off-the-ball zone coverage, this whole bend but don't break thing.
But now they're going to get a completely different dynamic of a challenge, in my opinion, defensively today.
Definitely.
Because as well as Washington has been known to throw it, Minnesota lives by running it. That doesn't mean they won't throw. Doesn't mean they can't throw. They have a veteran quarterback. I think, George Perlis used to say you got to have experience, and he always said experience is expensive. Remember that, Brock? He said that all the time. It's expensive. You need experience, but it's expensive. He said that all the time. And then, the years since then, now I kind of come to realize he's exactly right. And Minnesota's not bringing a young team in here. This is a team that has been together for some time. Yeah. So if I'm at Minnesota, okay, guys, I know you can beat Colorado. I know you can beat some of these other flyweights that have been here. What do you do when you go to Spartan Stadium? Yeah. Can you beat those guys? So, and they're unranked too.
Right, and we'll get to that. We'll go over their resume so far. I've got some thoughts on that. I'm sure you two do as well. But I wanted to stay with the pass defense a little bit more, because obviously that is the topic de whatever is French for the last year, because that's been the most glaring issue, and then it was on full display last week. So it's one of those, I don't mean this as a put down, it's a low-hanging fruit, like sports talk radio topic because it's very identifiable. Everyone can see it. And it shows up in the stats and the box score.
You don't have to be a football expert to know it.
Yes.
Everybody, you watch TV, oh, yeah, they can't cover that guy.
With that in mind, obviously, anytime Michigan State has any kind of issue there, it's going to be pronounced in the fan base. It's going to be globbed onto. But I saw differences in that pass defense last week. Again, that's not what we saw last year. We saw guys getting beat in coverage. Last week, there was no coverage to be spoken of. It was clear to me watching the game that assignments were being blown regularly because guys, again, were running scot-free, wide open. Why does that happen?
Well, I wonder what Michigan State's coaching staff, when they got back home and they all went and looked at the tape, as they say, they look conservative on defense. They don't blitz anybody.
That's another thing.
They put no pressure on the guy. Now, I get that Penix is he's very mobile. He makes plays with his feet. He gets outside the contain. He can throw accurately on the run. I don't think that's necessarily Tanner Morgan. But on the other hand, how long are these guys supposed to be in coverage before you make the quarterback uncomfortable? And I never saw Penix very uncomfortable. And I saw that the same thing last year when Ohio State went up and down the field on him, when Purdue went up and down the field. Michigan went up and down the field on him. To some degree, Nebraska. Now, is that because the players aren't good enough or because the coaches are very – I think the blitz is the most underrated part, especially in college football. I think these quarterbacks, when you pressure these guys and force them to throw before they want to throw – Penix, he took all that time, then he ran out, and they took a little more time, then he ran a little bit back. Well, by that time, there's no defensive back even in the picture. Yeah. And they're all looking at each other and pointing here and pointing there. Is that talent, or is that coaching, or is that a combination of both?
That's the question I asked Jim Comparoni, of course, of SpartanMag.com last year when we were seeing all the defensive back problems. I asked him, what is it? Is it talent or is it scheme? And he said, literally, this isn't a cop-out answer, although it sounds like it, a combination of both.
I think that's probably right. The scheme is clearly, as Tim pointed out, conservative. The idea is to keep everything in front of you, make teams. It's supposed to increase the amount of plays offensive side needs to go down the field, because the idea is the more plays a college quarterback throws it, the greater the odds are he's going to throw it to you, because they're just not as accurate as a pro quarterback. The problem is you got to have some kind of pass rush to generate those inaccurate throws. Yeah. And Michigan State, I know last year State finished top 10 in sacks, something like 48, and they were right up there with the likes of Pitt, who had the top pass rush all year. The problem was, if you go and look at those games, and I've looked it up, the amount of sacks that they actually got in the big time games against the teams with a ton of NFL talent across the offensive line, those are games that they lost, right? I'm talking Ohio State specifically. But the Michigan game, they won. But look, Cade McNamara threw for 400-some yards in that game. He was never uncomfortable on a regular basis.
Well, and what if he would have kept throwing? What if he would have kept throwing? They stopped throwing in the fourth quarter, and then he got dinged up and went out. They turned it over. Yeah. And then he got dinged up again. They turned it over.
And he ended the game with a turnover, right?
And furthermore, I think that, to be, in my opinion, I never thought Kenneth Walker was ever going to win the Heisman Trophy, but I thought he at least had one tremendous Heisman Trophy performance, and that was Michigan, because he scored 5 touchdowns, and if he doesn't play in that game, State gets blown out, because he made, in my opinion, a lot of those runs on his own, and Michigan did not tackle him very well. And I think Michigan thought they had the game in the bag when it was 30-14, took their foot off the gas when, like you say, McNamara's going up and down the field and up and down the field on them. Now, if I was Minnesota today, though, I wouldn't just try to jam the ball. I think you got to look at where State's vulnerable and try and go after that. I mean, to me, you got to be a little bit of a river, but you got to, what is it? Risk reward. I think you got to risk a little something. I think you got to try to throw on these guys a bit, because I think if they just try to run this Ibrahim over and over and over, and he's very good, he's an NFL caliber prospect if he stays healthy, I think they need to do more than that, because I'm trying to figure out how many points does Minnesota need today to win. I haven't figured it out.
Yeah. I don't know, but to your point on the running attack, so Michigan State has been adequate at stopping the run since last year. And in fact, some games, they've absolutely shut it down. Michigan could not run the ball in Michigan State, and that's their MO. That's why Cade McNamara was throwing all over wherever he wanted, because State sold out to stop the run, and they took it away. Those guys, those two backs combined for something like 98 yards last year against them.
Right.
They did it to Pitt. Pitt had a really good running game all year, and State shut that down. So I think they have the horses, and the scheme is capable of shutting down the run because we've seen it before. The issue, though, I wonder about today is, will Jacob Slade play? And he's probably, if not number one, their number two defensive tackle. I guess it depends on your preference there, but can we agree he's one of the best interior defensive linemen in the Big Ten? And when you're going up a rushing attack with this Ibrahim and the way they like to run hard between the tackles, this is a day where you really need him.
But guys, with a senior quarterback, if State bunches up, tries to put 8 men in the box to try to stop the running attack, is that when you go a play action pass with a senior quarterback with Tanner Morgan?
Yes, but that's what State. I'm guessing that's the game plan. Make him beat you. Don't let
him, meaning Tanner Morgan,
yes,
the senior QB.
Do not let the running game blow the top off of the defense. If we're going to lose this game on defense, it's going to be because the quarterback, without his best receiver, who's now out for the season, is going to beat us over the top. And I just wanted to hammer this last point home and pick your brain on that. With what we saw in the pass defense all last year and then last week, again, though, looked different last week because guys weren't even covered. And to Tim's point, it's impossible for everyone talks about the no-fly zone from a decade ago. Guys, part of what made the no-fly zone great was they only had to cover for 2.5 seconds.
Right.
Yeah.
The guys now have to cover for 6 seconds sometimes,
Tim,
and that's not tenable.
Tim, what do you call it now? Not the no-fly zone?
Fly the friendly skies.
Yeah.
It was stolen by United Airlines, that line. It was stolen by United, but I say
Not
now,
quite,
today
but...
it's fly the friendly skies. If you're the other team, fly the friendly skies.
You might have to call White Law PLLC about that.
Oh, copyright
infringement on your intellectual property.
But this Minnesota, he's been in big game. I mean, what is he, Brock? A 6th-year senior? This Tanner Morgan? I think
he's at least a 5th year.
He's going to get a pension up there if he, the way he's been there forever. But by the way, anyway, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say with the pass defense, again, if you listen to the coaches, like what did they think went wrong? Tucker said right after the game, he said, we're going to be sick to our stomach when we look at the tape because it's going to be death by inches. That's what he said. When we got to talk to him again on Monday after he had the weekend or I guess the day to watch the film and all that, he stood by that and he said, they asked point blank, some smart, intrepid reporter, maybe it was one of yours, Tim's, asked, was this a player issue, like a personnel issue? Was it a scheme issue? And he said, this was a personnel issue. We had guys not communicating and missing assignments, and there will be personnel changes. Okay, that means we're going to see some different players playing more in the secondary. But the fact that he's saying it was missed assignments and not the scheme, is it possible then that everything we talked about all last week in the media, and I'm not just saying this to pat myself on the back, but the traveling west and doing it the day before the game, that had to have some impact.
Oh, yeah, they left Friday, didn't they?
Yes, they got there the day before the game. So, hey, that's questionable now, right? But the fact that they did that, and the history shows that not just Michigan State, but the Big Ten in general just does not play well going out there, especially in the regular season. Can't that accommodate for how poorly they not just played, but the bigger issue in the secondary is always the communication pre-snap, which clearly was broken last week. That had to be part of it.
Well, I mean, Comp said this way. He called Penix the best quarterback in the country. I think it's a little early to get to that. I mean, and they were 3-9 last year. Look, I get that this game was completely stacked for the home team, and I thought if Michigan State doesn't come out hot, and they didn't come out hot, I thought they were still in the game till the last series when Washington scored with 4 seconds to go in the half, because 22-8 and getting the ball in the third quarter to me to get to start the second half. I thought that, there's a thought process in there. This is not over. The announcers made a big deal, and then he hits one with 4 seconds to go in half. Now it's 29-8. And the place is going nuts, and everybody's jumping up and down, running off at halftime. State's got their dauber down.
Yeah.
Even though they came back with a good drive to start the second half, Washington went back down the field.
Yeah,
like I say, when they figured they had to score, they scored.
Yeah.
It's when they didn't think they have to score. Well, let's see now. Can we work on the clock a little bit? And I think for any team, that's where it gets tenuous, except Maryland. Because Maryland just fumbled the opening kickoff 8 seconds into the game, J.J. McCarthy to Schoonmaker 10 yards with 14:52 to go in the first quarter. Michigan 7, Maryland nothing.
You got to give it to them. Every year they find new ways to completely pop the balloon as soon as conference play starts.
The opening kickoff, and J.J. hit it right away. Now, State goes to Maryland next week for a 3:30 game, so Maryland will go back home. Now, it's not over yet. There's 59 minutes and 52 seconds left to go in that game.
Plenty of time for Michigan to cover.
So there's plenty of time to Maryland turn it over again and let Michigan pour it on as a 17.5-point favorite.
I thought State was in trouble last week after State stopped Washington on the goal line, and then Jalen Berger got caught in the end zone. It was Broussard, I'm sorry. Yep, it was Broussard. He got caught in the end zone, which they originally called not a safety, but replay reviewed it, and he was clearly in the end zone.
So far, all the talk's been the problems on defense. Yeah. I don't think offense is ready to go into the Hall of Fame yet either.
No, and that my thought all offseason was, and I feel validated by this because Xavier Henderson, the now injured, defensive captain, said this. We will go as far as our offensive line takes us this season. And Michigan State's offensive line, not good. Against a finesse Pac-12 team, the strength of MSU's offensive line is supposed to be its interior three guys. On that safety, those interior three guys wound up a yard or two backward, and that's why Broussard is on his belly in the end zone, giving 2 points to Washington. So you're right. That's something I've been complaining about all week, all offseason, is the offensive line. The fan base is fixated on the pass defense. And you know why? Because there are stats on that. You can see that in a box score. You don't see it on the offensive line. It's harder to quantify. But I'm telling you, you saw it last week. That's got to change. They're going to face better defensive linemen today. And I'm not saying Minnesota's.
Oh, yeah, they are. I'm
not trying to hype up Minnesota. That's not the point. They just have a better talent profile than Washington does. So we've got to find that out today, too. Look, I know we got to take a break, but I got to get this out of both of you guys because it was the whole point of the segment. Look what happens today if they lose. If Michigan State doesn't win this game, they're 2-2. They've got 2 losses before October. Usually, for most teams with these kinds of aspirations, that means season over, right, for the most part. But then, when you consider possibly being 2-2 going into October, with what's coming up for them, next week at Maryland, if Michigan State can't stop the pass against Washington, and if Minnesota, God forbid, comes in here and throws the ball with a ton of success, what's Tua's little brother going to do with their Air Coryell reprise offense next week in Maryland? So keep that in mind.
No lock win.
Right. And then there's this. October 8th, Ohio State comes to town. The week after that, Wisconsin, which is obviously not going to throw the ball a lot. Then you get a bye week before you go to Michigan. My point here is if Michigan State doesn't take care of business today, you are distinctly looking right in the face of a potential 3-5 or worse 2-6 start to the season. So today's game could be the difference between achieving those goals of a New Year's Six bowl game again, or we're talking about, will this team just make a bowl game?
Yeah, but it's good for radio.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a dream for us.
It's good
but
for
is it
radio.
a must-win? I'm going to get both you guys on the record. Is this a must-win for Michigan State today?
If you thought you had dissonant followers after last week, to your point, if they lose before the home crowd today, I don't understand why Minnesota's favored in this game. I can't figure that out.
Well,
why is Minnesota favored?
Sometimes, and this is, I get why most people don't understand.
If they win by 4 points or more, then I understand why they're favored, because that's exactly what they did.
But remember, though, the line isn't necessarily indicative of what odds sharks think the final score will be. The line is set to balance the money on either side of the wager.
We've talked about this.
Well, and because there was an ABC national network in prime time last week showing Michigan State letting the other team just run up and down the field, the thought was, gee, Minnesota's 3-0. And State just got hosed again and got crushed by a team that So I guess Minnesota's going to be a slight favorite in this game. Yeah, although on your show yesterday, I heard the Minnesota beat writer, who sounded reasonably credible and not a homer. He picked Minnesota to win 27-20.
He did. Okay. His name's Randy Johnson. He was not an all-star Hall of Fame worthy left-handed starting pitcher. Randy Johnson.
Nor did he play quarterback for the Denver Broncos back in the 70s.
But I thought, listening to him, he thinks this Minnesota team is not the typical run-of-the-mill average Big Ten West Minnesota team. Listening to him.
I got the vibe that he thinks they are what they've been, but the West is down, and it's their chance.
It is.
Last thing before, and I'll promise I'll get out after this. Brock is going to be very upset at me for dragging this out. But Tim's talking about the line, right? So it opened at Minnesota -3. It opened at Michigan State -1.5. It's up to Minnesota -3, laying 3 on the road. Sometimes the better indicator of what might happen, though, is looking at what percentage of the bets and what percent of the money is on either team. And if we look at that right now, 58% of the total tickets on this game are on Michigan State, and 56% of the money on all those bets are on Michigan State. So that tells me the serious gamblers or professionals are putting that money on State, loving the +3, and I could get why you would like that as a better Michigan State getting 3 points at home. We've got a ton more to get to today. We'll talk more lines later on. Speaking of lines, the phone line is open for you to join us. 517-300-4263. Back in a few minutes here. Continue breaking this game down, talking more college football with you. This is the Whitelaw PLLC Tailgate Show.
So 1240 WJIM Traffic Center, driven by Shaheen Chevrolet and Cadillac. Relax and enjoy the Shaheen difference.
Taking a look at your traffic, not too bad right now. A little bit slower than normal coming in from the northeast between I-69 going westbound between M52 and Woodbury Road. There is a single lane closure causing that a bit of a slowdown there. Also, if you're coming in from the east on Grand River, there is a single lane closure between Mohawk Road and Cornell Road. That'll be for another week or so. Take the posted detour and find an alternate route if you possibly can. Taking a look at your weather, it's 55 degrees and overcast, 30% chance of showers throughout the game. Whether that affects the contest between Michigan State and Minnesota, just wait and see. The high temperature today will be 64. It'll get down into the 50s later on. That's your game day travel update, and it's brought to you by Shaheen Chevrolet and Cadillac. Relax and enjoy the Shaheen difference.
This is the Whitelaw PLLC Tailgate Show on Lansing's Big Talker, 1240 WJIM and Classic Rock 94.9 MMQ. Today's broadcast is brought to you by Whitelaw PLLC, Shaheen Chevrolet, Price Right Auto and RV, Blue Moon Belgian White. Now, let's talk to the Dean of Sports, Tim Staudt, and offensive-minded host, Beanie Howell from the Price Right Auto and RV Studios.
Welcome back to the Whitelaw PLLC Tailgate Show here on 1240 WJIM and 94.9 Classic Rock 94.9 MMQ. Live from the Price Right RV Studios. I've got a programming note, and then we'll take a look at the scoreboard. But before that, I'm going to throw it to the Dean of Sports, Tim Staudt, who had an interesting breaking news item just over the break as it pertains to Michigan State.
Well, the word is that Jaden Reed, who did not make the trip to Washington last week, Michigan State's number one receiver, he's going to try to make a go of it today. Now, and this it's a little damp and it's a little cool. My read on that is, he'll show, how players are. If they dress and they warm up and there's a crowd, they want to play. There's adrenaline. So my guess on him is he's going to try to play, and he may tell him I can play. My guess is if Michigan State does not need him, they would prefer him to take another week to get ready. But if we need him, it would, let's get him in there one way. But I didn't think that his absence was the difference in the game last week, because I think they've got other receivers that are going to get better, that catch the ball pretty well, that run routes pretty well. Excuse me. Now, look, Thorne and Reed are longtime acquaintances, longtime friends. They know each other well. How Minnesota, adjusts to all this sort of thing. I'll be curious, Beanie, to see whether or not Minnesota goes hard after Peyton Thorne. I thought he took some brutally tough hits. He's tough. But he's also lucky, because a couple of those hits, I thought just inches different hitting the ground or something, contact. The difference between just getting a tough hit and I get back up and breaking a collarbone, to me, is narrow. And if they lose him, then we don't even need to do the tailgate, in my opinion. We don't need to do the show the rest of the year.
I don't know. Have you seen the backup has a really cool tattoo sleeve?
Well, he may need it. He may need it one way or the other. It just looks to me like these teams think that we got to. I think they think one of the issues with Thorne is, can we, like any quarterback, can we force him to throw before he wants to throw? He wants to make a play.
Well, to his credit, he had to throw very uncomfortable, and he looked awesome. He was pretty damn good last week. Peyton Thorne finishes
in the second half,
especially. Yeah, but his final line is 30 for 42.
Yeah, but what were
300 yards, 3 touchdowns,
when it was 29-8 and 36-14? Was it? Plus the fact I claim. I think as the season goes on, especially in the big games, Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, anybody else you want to name, without Kenneth Walker there to help them so that other defenses have got to target the running back and not the quarterback. Mm-hmm. Now, not that those other two guys that they run, but, they're like everybody else. If you block for them, they got speed. If you don't block for them, they're going to get stopped at the line like they did so often against Washington. I was surprised Washington's defense was as good as it was for most of that game.
Well, is that what it was, though? Or was it Michigan State's offensive line just did nothing against an opponent that they should have pushed around?
Which is what you've talked about all season, Brandon.
Yeah, I think that's going to be, everyone's fixated on the pass defense, and for good reason, I understand. But I really do think the bigger problem or issue for Michigan State is they haven't had an offensive line capable of imposing its will on an opposing front seven since the playoff year in 2015. They just haven't. So that's got to change. Speaking of changing, I need to get you this programming note for regular 1240 WJIM Lansing's Big Talker listeners, as well as those of Classic Rock 94.9 MMQ. Regular Saturday programming will be available on each of these stations' respective apps and the various streaming services throughout football coverage. So, and then afterwards, regular programming will be joined in progress on the linear terrestrial stream. So for those of you who are big fans of All Request Saturday night on Classic Rock 94.9 MMQ, Wally Londo will start that promptly at 7 o'clock. But it will only be available on the various streams, like through our app and the website and your streaming devices. But it will be joined again in progress on the terrestrial signal as soon as network coverage of Michigan State hosting Minnesota concludes tonight. So there's that. And now let's take a look around the country, the top 25 scoreboard first. Then we'll hop into some Big Ten scores. Number 1, Georgia. In the first quarter is leading Kent State 9-3. Wow. Kent State has taken a beating, right? They were an early victim of Washington. Now they're heading to the hedges. Michigan got that early first touchdown thanks to Maryland screwing up the opening kickoff. We talked about that. Now, about halfway through the first quarter, Michigan leading 7-3. Number 5, Clemson on the road. Number 21, Wake Forest. It's 14-0 in the first quarter, Clemson. Central Michigan collecting a paycheck today in the mountains of Pennsylvania. It's 14-0 Penn State with 4 minutes to go in the first quarter. Number 17, Baylor, tied at 7 in the first quarter against Iowa State. Number 24, Pittsburgh, Pat Narduzzi hosting Rhode Island, 14-7 in the first quarter. Now let's take a look at your Big Ten scoreboard. I think I just covered all the games. I did. That's the only Big Ten games going, Penn State and Michigan.
I got to give Maryland credit. They hung in there, and they went down and moved against Michigan's defense and got something.
They did.
When you have a catastrophic start like
That's
that,
true.
Can that just break you right then and there?
You
got
mentioned it
100,000 people go.
Right.
And I watched the video of this. All the Wolverines are jumping up and down and bebopping because they're up 7-0. They got a free one. So now Maryland's got that. This guy takes a field and he's never had the lead. He's behind. The moment he takes a field, Tagovailoa gets him down the field. And they get a field goal. Now, does that mean they're going to win? Not necessarily at all. But to me, State's got to play these guys on a road next week. And that tells me he moved the ball in adverse, because Michigan's all fired up because they got a great start and so on and so forth. I would have guessed if you were going to tell me a score, it would have been 10-0 or 14-0 instead of 7-3.
Nope, they did respond. We'll give them credit.
Or am I stretching this beyond what's reality?
A little bit of a stretch.
Well,
little bit.
That's where I come from on it, just because, again, like we talked about last week, I'm a big believer in what Nick Saban said about it's hard to get your team up for more than 2 games a year, to get them to play to their full potential, to be really up for a game. How does Jim Harbaugh, they've been through the most embarrassing non-conference schedule I can think of. And I don't know how he got his team excited to play those games. Obviously the quarterback was, because he was trying to win a job. But now it's the 4th straight ho-hum blasé, boring opponent. Maybe you can trick them into this whole, it's the Big Ten opener. You got to be excited for that, boys.
But they've been ridiculed the entire season. If I'm a Michigan football player, and I did go to the Final Four, and I am the defending Big Ten champion, and all I have heard is ridicule about who we play. Now we're playing a Big Ten team. Watch this. They were going nuts after they got the early touchdown from McCarthy there on the first play.
And now Michigan's just hit a long field goal. Jake Moody, a 52-yard field goal. It's 10-3 Michigan halfway through the first quarter.
And then it's over. There we go. We just popped the balloon.
The one thing that never comes up, though, maybe Michigan's really good.
Well, we don't know that for sure, though.
I mean, they are ranked fourth, fair or unfair. I don't know why they are, but they are ranked
No,
fourth.
they shouldn't be fourth. They're not the fourth best team in the country right now. They could be later on.
Yeah, but I mean, it is college football, so we talk about this stuff and try to decide things on paper because that's the history of college football. But I think based on what we do know, we do know that this was a team that was very, very good a year ago. Now, a lot of the big pieces are gone. Obviously, you lose a pass rush duo like that fundamentally changes things.
I think the game that's overlooked completely this year is going to be Penn State at Michigan before the Michigan State game on October 15th. I think that Penn State, I heard I think Central Michigan's going to hang in there. I think Central, they're going to hang in there. They gave Oklahoma State a tough time, and Penn State has just gone right down the field twice on them. And I wouldn't want to play them. And I know I don't want to play them in Happy Valley.
Well, we need to talk about them because Penn State has a reputation, at least in Big Ten country, outside of Pennsilvania, for losing big games.
They do.
Because under James Franklin, they tend to wilt in high-pressure situations.
But he can't play either. But I'm just saying, of all these teams, man, these guys look to me like they're going to be tough to play.
Well, I was actually on your – I know you I don't know if this is characterizing it right, but I think Brock would say that you love James Franklin.
Well, only because he hates him.
Got it. Well,
just because it gets a rise out of
him.
Yeah,
gotcha. 75. You're paying a guy $75 million. He's 7-5.
It's not an opinion to factually take a look at what their record has been. They were 7-5 a year ago, right?
Yeah.
And they lost some very good. They always, when they lose to State, I always say, "My God, I can't believe some of the things Penn State does to lose some of these games." I mean, that's factual.
That was a snowstorm last year,
but that
wasn't
was
it?
then, and this is now. And I'm just saying, I don't know how good Auburn is, but going down there and playing them in the SEC country with that crowd and going nuts, and they just dominated the game.
Now that was impressive.
It was, and that's why that's why I brought them up, from what Tim was saying.
No, if they give a game. Now, look, last year they played 9 overtimes at home against that brutal Illinois team and couldn't win the game. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, so it's things like that really color the reputation about Penn State, particularly in Big Ten country. But listen, I know it's college football's kind of habit to base current opinions and current evaluations on historical evidence. But let's look at just this season. How many other teams do you know at this point who have 2 legitimate road wins at Power 5 competition?
Oh, nobody.
And when's the last Big Ten team that went on the road and won in the SEC in the non-conference? I can't remember that happening.
Well, I'd like to find a Power 5 team that started out 3-0 with 3 non-conference wins against
teams with a pulse,
schools that are bigger than Sexton High School.
Yeah, it just doesn't happen. But look what Penn State. And now the Purdue game isn't really to their credit. That was just a quirky. The Big Ten schedules 1 or 2 like that every year.
I mean, remember State's Rose Bowl year? The non-conference menu was Southern Cal, Florida State, Notre Dame. I told Perlis, and they went to the Rose Bowl, even though they went 1 and 2. But I said to Perlis, I said, see if we see a non-conference schedule anywhere in the world like that again.
Well, that's one benefit of what's happening, the changing landscape of college
certainly
sports.
hope so.
That could be, right?
Television networks want good games, good non-conference games.
So this is excellent because Tim didn't even know I was going to go in this direction, and you just set it up perfectly for this. So I did want to give Penn State credit, winning at Purdue to start the season, clobbering Ohio at home, and then going to Auburn and winning. So they won both of those Auburn games in the home and home they did with them, which is impressive. How many Big Ten teams have come out of a home and home with any SEC opponent above 500, let alone 2-0?
I'm not saying they're going to win at Michigan, but this McCarthy's going to. I mean, I'm telling you, Penn State defense, they won't go in there scared. You got to deal with them. Now, if they give you the game and they make a dumb play or screw it up at the end, well, then you take the W and move on.
With that, though, Tim, I'm not sure about that. And the reason is I can't, outside of the pandemic year, which I'm not going to count because that wouldn't suit the narrative I'm trying to craft right now. But in my lifetime, and again, I'm only 34, I can't remember Penn State playing well in Ann Arbor. Brock, when was the last time they did?
They've won a few times.
Well, no, Penn State was 0-5 and won in Ann Arbor in the COVID year.
I'm not counting that.
Yeah, you're not counting that.
I admit that should be part of the calculus, but also it was a weird, funky year. Just if we take that out of the equation, which I know you can't, but let's just pretend we can. When was the last time, Brock? You tell me, because you watched.
I know Penn State won the year they should have got a share of the national title in '94. With Kerry Collins and Kajana Carter.
If that's the most recent time, then that's illustrating
They've
my
won
point.
more recently than that.
If Michigan finishes off today and is impressive at Iowa and then beats Penn State at home, my sense is they are going to be minimum 2 touchdown favorites, minimum to beat Michigan State 2 weeks after that. Because there's a bye week for both of them getting to October 29th.
Yeah, that's weird. Michigan and Michigan State, a bye week the same week.
We'll have 2 weeks of hype.
Yep.
2 weeks of hype.
I'm going to do some research here to see when the last time Penn State played well in Ann Arbor outside of the COVID year. But then one other thing before we get out, I wanted to pivot to this because, Tim, you're talking about how brutal the non-conference scheduling is. It's awful to watch. I think everyone agrees. And this is a topic we need to talk about Michigan State. Did Michigan State do itself any favors by scheduling that Washington game? What? Like, why? Because, look, you could be Michigan. You could have brought in another blind, deaf, whatever school, Sisters of the Poor University.
Well, this comes to philosophy then. Do you want to have a schedule where you sell tickets to your fans that the home games have a legitimate opponent in? Or are you just going to take whoever you can get the way Alabama and Michigan, they'll take in. Next year, Michigan's 3 non-conference next year are East Carolina, Bowling Green, and Nevada, Las Vegas.
Right. So let me respond to that with, so next year, Michigan State's non-conference, I don't know who the two...
Central Michigan, Richmond, and Washington at home.
So, okay, is Washington going to move the needle any more than those other two? Because I don't think it really does. You can feel better if you beat them because it's a Power 5, but does that really change ticket sales all that much? I just don't see... What did State benefit scheduling that home and home? Aside from they didn't have to pay a small school like $500,000 to $1 million to come up here. They didn't. They've got a black eye, and look, you want to talk about the real benefit of scheduling week to start off 3-0. Michigan State scheduled, I wouldn't say tough, but put a real road game in a true road environment in the Power 5 on their schedule, and they lost, and it cost them from being a top 10 team to out of the rankings in 1 week.
Like I say, this goes to the philosophy. You're talking about it from what's in the best interest of the team. And like Brock knows, I'm always looking at this stuff from what's the best interest for the fans. When you have to pay the same amount of money to watch Ohio State as you do Akron, something tells me that's bizarre.
Sure, I understand, but I am asking from Michigan State's perspective because that's really what it comes. It's a business, right? And they want to be successful. I just don't see the benefit in scheduling that game.
You can make look who Izzo scheduled this winter for non-conference with a team that nobody expects to do much in basketball.
It's different, though. You can afford regular season losses way more.
You have a lot more margin
basketball.
for error in college basketball.
There's a tournament at the end of the season. We don't really have that in college. Regular season losses can be crippling. Like we said, if Michigan State loses today, it's not even October and they have 2 losses. But season's over.
Well, look at Notre Dame. Notre Dame's 1-2. Their season's over.
But the playoff committee argues that there is which I don't necessarily agree with, that there is a strength of schedule factor in figuring who's the Final Four.
Sure, but if you have 2 losses and you're not in the SEC, you're out of the conversation.
Well, that's why it's got to change, and that's why they're going to 12 teams.
And that will change things. Then we will get some 3-loss teams in, I'm sure.
And then people will complain about that.
And it'll be much better. Instead of Akron, they'll schedule Kent State.
That's an improvement. All right, we got to go to break.
We got a guest on the other side.
Yep, we'll bring on that special guest, a voice from the not-so-distant past. You are all very familiar, and a friend of ours, David Mad Dog DeMarco, coming up with us in just a few minutes. This is the Whitelaw PLLC Tailgate Show.
Are you 40 WJIM Traffic Center, driven by Shaheen Chevrolet and Cadillac. Relax and enjoy the Shaheen difference.
Traffic is slowing up 69 westbound between M52 and Woodbury Road. That's due to the single-lane closure at the front of that area between Woodbury Road and Upton Road. Also, traffic a little bit slower than normal, 496 eastbound between Waverly Road and the start of the road closure at Martin Luther King Boulevard. That'll be active for another couple of weeks or so. Weather-wise, overcast and 55. Chance of rain throughout the game. Slight chance, that is. The high temperature will be 64 tonight. It'll get down into the low 50s. Game day traffic and weather is brought to you by Shaheen Chevrolet and Cadillac. Relax and enjoy the Shaheen difference.
This is the Whitelaw PLLC Tailgate Show on Lansing's Big Talker, 1240 WJIM and Classic Rock 94.9 MMQ. Today's broadcast is brought to you by Whitelaw PLLC, Shaheen Chevrolet, Price Right Auto and RV, Blue Moon Belgian White. Now, let's talk to the Dean of Sports, Tim Staudt, and offensive-minded host, Beanie Howell from the Price Right Auto and RV Studios.
Welcome back in, Whitelaw PLLC Tailgate Show on 1240 WJIM, Lansing's Big Talker, and Classic Rock 94.9 MMQ. Live from the Price Right RV Studios. Also brought to you by Blue Moon Belgian White, Shaheen Chevrolet and Cadillac, MSU Healthcare Sports Medicine, Doubting Industries, Schupan and Sons Recycling Industrial Services, Gravity Smokehouse, and MSU Federal Credit Union. Now it's time for Mad Dog's Take on the Game with David Mad Dog DeMarco, brought to you by Blue Moon Belgian White. One of a kind every time. Blue Moon is a proud partner of Michigan State Athletics. Dave, how the hell are you?
Hi, fellas. How the hell are you from the mountain of Cedar Bluff, Alabama? How's it going, Dean?
Well, I'm in here. I mean, every time I see Beanie or I hear him on the air, I think I remember those good old days, years and years and years and years and years and years and years. But time moves on, you know. So, we're back reunited again. Are you watching television football as we speak or not?
Yes, I've watched more college and pro football this year than I really ever had. It's the interest was always super there, but now it's ultra super there. And last week I watched a ton, and we started watching Michigan. And when I saw the returner for Maryland do a Jose Canseco imitation, I really, at that point in time, just started laughing at that situation. But, the Michigan State game last week was pathetic, and it smelled. It was terrible. Anybody that had gone to that game had to be throwing up all week. It was hard getting out of the airport at Washington and Seattle, and it was pathetic. I mean, when your coach comes out in his weekly presser, and he calls himself a horse crap coach, I mean that's the bottom's ready to drop out. This is a game-changer day for Michigan State. I think Tanner Morgan, he's the second leading passer in the history of Minnesota quarterbacks. They haven't had, a lot, but he's a pretty good quarterback, and I just don't know if this defense can stop him one way or the other. And Michigan State's a 3-point home dog. It's terrible.
Do you think today is a must-win for Michigan State?
Yes, absolutely, because it's not going to get any easier. I mean, Maryland might be a little bit of a hiccup, but then they have the big boys coming in with Ohio State, Wisconsin on homecoming. They got to go to Michigan. Michigan, Harbaugh or no Harbaugh, they know what happened last year. It's in the big house. Yeah, I think if they lose this game, I'm not going to say this is a disappointment. They can always, get better. But I mean, is Jaden Reed, is he going to play? I mean, they held him out. Nobody knew till we talked about that last week. He didn't play. They got to have some stops too. Their defensive secondary was. I mean, I thought that was the whole key to 1 year difference in last year. I mean, you got the head coach is the DB coach too, and he, is defensive-minded coach. And last week, I mean, when you have a quarterback that you've played against, even though D'Antonio was the coach, but they know what this guy is going to do. D'Antonio was on the sideline of that game, and he comes out and he just starts doing, throwing like Joe Willie Namath, and they know what this guy is going to do, and he just smoked them, and they came back a little bit, but, it was too little too late. They couldn't stop anybody.
No, and you're right. It's not going to get any easier for Michigan State. You mentioned the big boys, that 3-week stretch of Wisconsin, Ohio State, and at Michigan. But before that, they got to go to Maryland, and Maryland just turned Michigan over in the red zone. and Maryland tied with Michigan in the first quarter. Actually, we're going to the second quarter. Maryland just took the ball. They're at their own 38, turning Michigan over on their side of the field.
Can I pass something on from the Michigan State University Police? Normally, Brock, you do a traffic thing, don't you?
Yes, go on, but you got it. Go.
I got this just in from the MSU Police, because if you're all out driving around, ready to go tailgate, the police say at Michigan State, they sent me this note, expect heavy traffic congestion and delays exiting US 127 and I-496 at Trowbridge Road. Please enter campus from the east off of Hagedorn Road. We have officers in the area directing traffic and appreciate everyone's patience, to which Chris Solari of the Free Press has just also added, campus is a complete cluster. Down to one lane, passes only at Shaw and Farm Lane. Be prepared for delays. You know, when we were outside doing this tailgate show, I can remember, it was a Michigan game last year. We got on at that area, Shaw and Farm Lane. I'm telling you, I had to get out, because it was just gridlock. I had to walk whatever it was, half mile, whatever it was to you. Well, you know, I was nearly late for that thing because it was just gridlock.
You missed that yet, Dave?
Yeah, Dave, you missed that down there?
No, I don't think anything will ever be like that in the history of Michigan State again. I mean, the moons were alive. I got there. The gate opened up at 6:30. I got there at 6:40. It was misting rain. And game day was there, and it looked like NASA control just dropped that thing down on the field hockey. There was people guzzling beer and using the F word. I'm like, this is like I'm on another planet. I mean, my family had to get dropped off at Dagwoods, and they had to walk up. And then, I don't know if anybody knows this, but this is what I was told, that months later, game day, they tore that field up, and ESPN had to replace that because they tore it up. And you know, then our RV from Price Right got tore up, and I thought it was maybe, you know, vandalism thing, but it wasn't. It was the wind that did that. And Tim, that was sort of, it wasn't scary, but it was. Well, I mean, there was people you couldn't move. I never seen anything like that.
Part of the problem was both of them were 8-0. And it was the big national game, okay, and game days there. So when we got there, how many people were on that field? 10,000 people, many of whom were never going to go to the game itself, but they wanted to go be a part of game day and trash talk each other into oblivion, and that was where our setup was. So, you know, we were kind of hoping, you know, I hope this thing doesn't get out of that. But that got people on campus way early for that game. I think if game day hadn't been there, we'd have muddled our way through. Now, why there is an issue over on campus with traffic right now, other than the fact, you're not here, Dave, there is so much congestion, like Brock says, a road's torn up in the area. You can't get anywhere around here.
Dave, 496 is completely closed between Martin Luther King and Pennsylvania Avenue. It's going to be that way for another couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Grand River Avenue in Okemos, right out by the Meridian Mall, that's down to one lane both directions. That's going to be for another week. And there's the long-term construction on I-69 between Airport Road and basically Grand River. And that's going to be for another year, which they're going to stop right around Thanksgiving because of winter, and then they'll restart again next spring and finish in November 23.
And we don't have access to Dave's private helicopter anymore that we can get right here from the radio station to our location on campus. We don't have that.
I'm sorry about that. I had to just put that in a barn out in Mason till I come back.
Oh, so that's where you put it. Okay.
You know, the thing is, you know, we're talking about this traffic thing, so obviously there's still big-time interest in Michigan State, and of course there should be. You know, Tucker, everybody talks Common, the woodshed, all the wonderful stuff. Well, Kenneth Walker III isn't there anymore, okay? And you go into Washington was not ranked. They played against Penix. He owned them for 2 games at Indiana. He shut them out the last game. You know he's got a big arm. His problem is he can't stay healthy, and that's why he got in the transfer portal, gone to Washington. Washington's got a nice coach. He's going to be good there. They're going to get players. And that was just pathetic. It really was. It was very disappointing. Like I said, you saw last year, they got exposed against Purdue, and then Ohio State, Staudt played 3 quarters. It would have been 80-2, and you thought that they were going to work on that secondary. Now, they've had injuries. I mean, you always got to throw that in with all sports. They've had injuries. But still, I mean, you know, some of these portal guys are getting, I thought were going to be better, and they're just not getting the job done. And Minnesota Tanner Morgan's a very good quarterback. He saw the film from Penix. He knows Penix. He was in the Big Ten. So if they're going to do any damage on the road, today is the day they can do it. Because against any other opponents that are upper echelon in the Big Ten, I think, I heard a little bit of your show yesterday, Tim, and I think you guys were talking about this, and we just did a little bit. This is a game changer right here. These guys got to win this game. I watched game day. People are back and forth. Can Sparty do this? Can they, and they're like, hey, man, I was really disappointed in what I saw last week. I really thought I would see, a better showing by Michigan State. So, like I said, Tuck's coming, the woodshed. He gets on the podium, calls himself a horse crap coach. Dude, as we said last week, you're getting paid this kind of monetary situation. You got to be up there. I'm not saying they got to be up there with Ryan Day yet or Franklin yet, but they got to get better. And they regressed last week.
He's paid more than James Franklin, and the same as Ryan Day.
See, you guys all miss Dave's expertise like this on the tailgate shows from years past. I miss Dave's expertise because in my history of the tailgate show, he clearly went down in my memory as the finest bartender we had in the history of the tailgate show. The finest bartender we ever had left town, and I haven't recovered from it. Now, you're coming back from one home game, right?
Yeah, I'm going to be back for October 15th. I remember that one game last week or last year. You were knee walking out of that RV.
Yeah.
Then after that, it was like no mas, Dave, no mas. But yeah, you're right. It's two-pronged as far as a guy that brings it and a guy that, as far as a social chemist. I could fit the bill on that. There's no getting around that.
You can't believe how many tailgate shows I would walk into in years past, tired, a little down, the game doesn't get me excited. And then after I left the tailgate show, I was in a much better mood for whatever reason to get ready for the game day.
Right. Because you had those Mad Dog Marys. They carried you throughout the day.
I don't know, but see, now I'm in a bad. Okay, so Brock and I are in this pool. So my 10-point pick this week is Georgia giving 45.5 to Kent State. Well, guess what? Early in the second quarter, Georgia 12, Kent State 10. Now I'm not happy in it. What is it? Huh?
Maryland just took the lead on Michigan.
Maryland leads on Michigan. 17 to 10.
Well,
now Brock's going to be down.
And now Penn State leading 14-7. Central Michigan is driving inside the Penn State.
They just scored, actually.
Oh, they did?
They're kicking the extra point right now.
So it's going to be 14.
How about that? How about that, Dave? Fire up chips. They're about to tie it up and have it.
The moment Michigan renames the tunnel for Lloyd Carr, the Wolverines come out of that tunnel and go right into the tank.
Bad things happen.
Right into the tank with a new Lloyd Carr tunnel. They went right in the tank, and Maryland has come back and has the lead on Michigan.
Well, I still think Georgia was 40.5. I still like 40.5.
Yeah, but I got them at 45. Brock, you didn't take that game, did you?
Yeah, because I'm smarter than you in that respect.
Well, Kent State, Georgia, give me a break. This is number one team in the nation.
You got to go with Georgia given the points in that game. That's falling out of bed.
Yeah, don't worry. They're in the red zone already.
I don't.
Yeah. Well, and the moment I tried to say something nice about James Franklin with Penn State up 14-0, Central Michigan has now tied the score at 14-14 at Penn State. Now I'm rooting for CMU.
You put the Dean curse on him.
Well,
Tim.
you should root for CMU. Franklin is a dog coach. Everybody knows that.
No, not everybody, because Tim disagrees.
I've got him on Mount Rushmore with Jefferson and Franklin and George Washington, but that's just me.
Two Franklins.
That Eli Manning thing was pretty funny if you guys saw that.
Chad Powers, fantastic.
Yeah, it was great.
Hilariously funny.
Tim, you ought to do that at Channel 6. You ought to try to apply for a job at Channel 6 and get all disguised up and go in there.
I'm having all I can do to stay right where I am. I'm just telling you, every time I put that fob on the door, I say, I wonder if that thing's going to buzz and let me in.
Yeah, Dave, I had to let him in. He doesn't have a key to get in, so I had to let him in.
Took me 28. Yeah, I had 28 years here, and they gave me one last fall, and it's still locked out. I still can't get in.
Had one. They're worried that he might start taking stuff out of the building.
I never knew how they worked because nobody ever gave me one.
Hey, Dave, let me rescue this segment and ask you, do you want to go ahead and give the offensive keys brought to us by Whitelaw PLLC?
Yeah, I will. You're not rescuing anything. I think this is, everybody's, in a festive mood. You're doing all right, Brandon? Is that way I understand it?
As good as I can. He
needs a Mad Dog Mary really bad right now.
Yeah, well, I'm going to let you guys put it to him. Well, he doesn't like Mad Dog Marys.
I'm a beer guy, yeah.
No, but Tim, for you give me a thumbs up or thumbs down if you want me to mysteriously show up with some in a couple of weeks. But I'll go, these are your offensive keys. for today's ball game between the MSU Spartans and the Mini Gophers. Your Okies are brought to you by today. There are friends at White Law PLC. At White Law PLC, they use a team approach to solve their clients' legal issues. Call Jamie White and White Law PLC at 517-316-1195, 4595 Jolly Road, Suite 340 in Okemos, Michigan. Last week's pathetic loss is behind this team, or is it? MSU is a 0.3 underdog at home. They dropped out of the top 25. They were there number 11. Mel Tucker calls himself a horse crap coach, and no more cream puffs. Minnesota has 6 returning defensive starters. Peyton Thorne has to continue to get better and hit his targets. We're not sure if Reed will play yet. So other wide receivers will have to stand up to the challenge. Will Berger, Broussard get the ground game going? The O-line has to be much better. This will be a close game that MSU must be efficient on offense. If Thorne struggles, he will have to get the hook. This game is a toss-up to me.
Why don't you go ahead and give us the prediction, too, on top of that?
I will say, just because we are MSU tailgate, a lot of people are going against Sparties. I heard a little bit of Tim's thing. I'm going to go Michigan State 27-24. I went that last week. I think, again, these guys, in a sense of urgency has to be there. They got to realize this is a turning point. They'll regress even more if they don't win this game at home. I think people are going to be jacked up to get into that stadium, tailgating, getting fired up, and Thorne knows, he's got a lot of responsibility on him. He didn't play that well 2 games ago, played okay last week. The offensive line, they had some injuries. So that's what I'm going to say, 27-24 State.
All right, Dave, it was nice to hear from you. Let's do it again the same time next week because it's a 3:30 kick again next week for Michigan State at Maryland.
All right,
so
I'll be expecting. You guys have a great one. Tim, it's always a great talking and getting some laughs with you guys. And Brandon, I'm glad you're doing well. So you guys enjoy the weekend.
Take care.
Take care, Dave. Appreciate it. That was Mad Dog's take on the game, brought to you by Blue Moon Belgian White. One of a kind every time. Blue Moon is a proud partner of Michigan State Athletics. And that is time for us to go to break here on the White Law PLLC Tailgate Show. Back in just a few here on 1240 WJIM, Lansing's Big Talker, and Classic Rock 94.9 MMQ.
Lansing's Big Talker, the 1240 WJIM Traffic Center. Driven by Shaheen Chevrolet and Cadillac. Relax and enjoy the Shaheen difference.
Taking a look at your traffic right now, 69 westbound between M52 and Woodbury Road. That's a bit slower than normal due to a single lane closure in that area. That'll be, that construction is going to be for another couple of days or so. And 127 at Trowbridge, that's a very, very slow right now. Motorists, find an alternate route if you possibly can at this time as people are coming in to watch the game today. Taking a look at your weather right now, 55 degrees and overcast. The high temperature today will be 64. There's a 30% chance of showers throughout the game today. Low temperature will be down into the 50s. Your game day travel update is brought to you by Shaheen Chevrolet and Cadillac. Relax and enjoy the Shaheen difference.
This is the White Law PLLC Tailgate Show on Lansing's Big Talker, 1240 WJIM and Classic Rock 94.9 MMQ. Today's broadcast is brought to you by White Law PLLC, Shaheen Chevrolet, Price Right Auto and RV, Blue Moon Belgian White. Now, let's talk to the Dean of Sports, Tim Staudt, and offensive-minded host, Beanie Howell from the Price Right Auto and RV Studios.
Welcome back. White Law PLLC Tailgate Show on 1240 WJIM, Lansing's Big Talker, and Classic Rock 94.9 MMQ, live from the Price Right RV Studios. Also brought to you by Blue Moon Belgian White, Dart Bank Mortgage Joe Sambear, Ameriprise Financial Craig Stiles, DBI We Do Office, High Caliber Karting and Entertainment, The Student Bookstore, The Nut House, and Gazelle Wealth Management. All right, so before we get back into the Michigan State talk, we've got a what was that, Tim? Was that your phone going
crowd
off?
Noise from some of the games. I'm just checking to see what stadiums are filled early.
Well, that's like a Tim update if I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Yep.
But before we get to the attendance updates around the country, let's take a look at the top 25 scoreboard. Number 1, Georgia, leading 19-10 over Kent State in the second quarter, about 7 minutes left there. This one, it's still early, but I didn't think Maryland would score this many points on the day. But with 10:30 left in the second quarter, Maryland is leading number 4 Michigan in Ann Arbor 13-10. Number 5 Clemson with a 10-point lead over number 21 Wake Forest in Wake Forest 17-7. You got to feel good and a little proud if you're a CMU alum. Fire up chips. They're all tied up at 14 in Happy Valley with number 14 Penn State. There's about 5 minutes left before halftime there. Number 17 Baylor, 17-7 lead over Iowa State on the road in Ames, Iowa. 3:39 left in the second half. And then the last top 25 action going on right now. Number 24 Pitt with a 24-7 lead at home over Rhode Island. I think they call them URI. That's 3:39 left in the second quarter there. And that's all the Big Ten action that's ongoing right now.
Later on today, guys, other than Michigan State and Minnesota, Indiana is at Cincinnati. That's a 3:30 start. And then we got 4 night games coming up at 7 o'clock. Iowa is at Rutgers at 7 o'clock. Miami of Ohio is at Northwestern. Northwestern 1 and 2. Ohio State hosting Wisconsin. That's the ABC game, 7:30. Fowler and Herbstreit are going to be there, and Purdue hosts Florida Atlantic. That's at 7:30. And of course, Illinois beat Tennessee Chattanooga not last night. It was Thursday night, 31-0.
So we'll look at some of those spreads for those games a little bit later on before we get out. We are 2 hours 15 minutes from kickoff. Michigan State hosting Minnesota. Kind of reset that talk a little bit now. Some stats for you. I know, look, it's college football. Does this really matter to today's game? Probably not, but people are interested in these kinds of things just because, again, it's college football and it's Big Ten college football, so it has a long history. This will be the 38th meeting all time between Michigan State and Minnesota, and MSU leads all time. Was that 21-17? Did I get that right? I'll have to double check that. It looks like I made a typo. But anyway, MSU leads the all-time series. They've won the last 5 matchups dating back to 2010. Most recently, they played in 2017. MSU won 30-27 at Minnesota. But when I think about the issues with Michigan State this year, obviously you ask any MSU fan and probably any casual college football observer, and they will tell you the story of Michigan State, at least so far, is the pass defense or lack thereof. And so that's triggering a bit of trauma I have. Maybe you guys remember this. The 2009 Michigan State at Minnesota game was played on Halloween, which is always a weird night to play a football game. But it's affectionately become known in MSU circles as the wheel route game. And if you can remember that was year 3 of Mark D'Antonio, and this was back when people in this fan base were calling for the dismissal of Pat Narduzzi, particularly after that game when Michigan State could not cover a running back coming out of the backfield down the sideline to save their life. It's just interesting to me the commonalities between the time frames, because here we are in year 3 now of Mel Tucker. People want the defensive coordinator fired, and look what was going on then with D'Antonio in year 3 and people wanting Narduzzi fired, and we all know what happened a couple of years later. I don't know. I just wanted to reset that a little bit and get your guys' take. With all the hype, I guess hype's not the right word, all the outrage over Michigan State's pass defense and an overwhelming chorus of the Michigan State fan base calling for the firing of Scotty Hazelton after last week. In fact, many were calling for his dismissal last season and the offseason, but Tucker kept him, and Tucker personally invested himself into the coaching of the defensive backs. What do you make of that, Tim, of this fan base wanting a pound of flesh in the form of the defensive coordinator being fired?
Well, look, when you have a large fan base and you win, everybody's happy. When you lose and you're used to winning, then you start pointing fingers. I don't think this is any different. If State plays well today and Minnesota struggles, then nobody will say a word. If State struggles today, I think it'll go right to the head coach as well. That, the head coach has got a lucrative extended contract, which is well known. It's been well publicized. if you keep winning, or if you do win, well, then nobody's going to complain. If you lose, well, I mean, if Michigan struggles today, well, then they're going to complain about the head coach. That's just the nature of the beast, especially in college sports, because the fan bases, especially at schools of this size, and for the investment they make to go to these games, they don't want to go lose. They want to win.
For sure.
Fingers get pointed. I never overreact to all that stuff, because when I hear, well, the fan base, who exactly is that? Or are there others that kind of look at the head coach instead, or just say, well, the player, bad calls, bad officials, breaks, bad. Yeah, I think that varies across the board. What I don't know is the impact that gambling legally will have on the reaction of many. In other words, of the 75,000, or however many are in the stadium today, how many of those people are betting on this game?
I still don't know if it's that big of a chunk. I don't get me wrong.
I don't think it's a big chunk either.
Sports betting is obviously a huge industry to the tune of billions of dollars, but I still don't think the casual fan is all that invested in it. But that's an interesting point. Let me ask you this then, because you brought up another interesting point. Something I've been thinking about, at least since last week. Obviously, this has been a thing all over the last year or so, but especially since the loss in Washington, there were, again, how representative is this segment of the fan base? Impossible to say. It's definitely a small percentage, because most fans don't go on Twitter and don't call into sports radio. But the ones who do those things have been calling for Hazelton's firing for a while, and it reached a fever pitch last night. There were MSU fans wanting him to get the Lane Kiffin treatment and get fired on the tarmac, or the Herm Edwards treatment and get fired in the end zone after the game. But
how many people sitting in the stands today can even name Michigan State's defensive coordinator?
That's a good point. But my question is, are they missing the forest through the trees? Because I get that he's the defensive coordinator, but he's doing what his head coach who hired him and kept him wants him to do.
There's no question.
Yeah.
And that same head coach is personally coaching the defensive backs.
Brock will always tell you, because he always talks. Look, coaching in college football and college sports obviously is a huge deal. But when it comes down to it, who's between the lines playing? I want to know who's playing. You know what I mean? Do you have good players? Are your players better than their players by a wide enough margin that everything else is not going to make a difference in terms of who wins a game, because you got better personnel than the other side does? Now, that does not mean that I don't think coaching matters, because you got to assemble these guys. You got to put them together. You got to get them into be a team, bonding, all practice, blah, 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 the whole deal, make them better along the way. And I also think in sports you need good luck. I think you need breaks. Because I think it's like Antonio said, I think there are a lot of margins of victory and defeat are just a matter of inches and breaks and good calls, bad calls.
And that's part of the deal in sports. If you can't deal with that in sports, don't follow it.
Totally agree.
But people who go public with their discontent, mostly it's negative, not positive. That's just the nature of the beast.
Guys, in the second half, I went to Twitter for the Michigan State-Washington game, and it was all negative. Fire Scotty Hazelton. Fire this guy. Bench this guy. Bench that guy. And I'm like, really?
But you're right.
It's part of the deal, but I'm like, really?
I think that's a good thing, because that shows me the fan base is taking ownership.
They care.
And the fan base is holding the program to a standard that a program who pays its head coach among the top 5 in the country ought to.
That's fair to say. That's fair to say.
If Georgia went out there and put out a performance like last week Michigan State did in Washington, after having a full year of bad pass defense, they would be calling for the defensive coordinator to be fired on the tarmac. That's how it works. I think that's where we are now. Now, Michigan State doesn't have the mantle or the trophy case that the Georgias or Alabamas or Ohio States have, right? But they're investing the same resources, and it's only reasonable to expect similar results in terms of wins and losses.
Not perfection, but excellence.
Absolutely. And look, I don't think it's all that unreasonable how fans behaved after that last week, because it wasn't that they lost. It was that they lost doing the exact same thing that cost them last year, that we were told would be cleaned up, and actually has to be, right? Because there's no way it could be worse than last year, because they finished, as Mel Tucker said, dead-ass last in pass defense. And yet last week, somehow it looked worse. I have to believe, and I'm no expert, but just my layman's opinion, I have to believe the reason it was so much worse last week had to do with the same thing that has ailed this program and every single other Big Ten one when it travels out that way in the regular season, and why they can never win out there.
Let's see what Washington does at home today with Stanford. Maybe Washington's really good. Or maybe that guy is the best quarterback in the country. Maybe he is.
I don't think there's any doubting he is a very good quarterback.
And that's part of the issue, yeah.
State's got a sample size to prove that. Like playing him, whether it's there or Indiana. We know
the expectations here have changed because of that contract, obviously.
And rightfully so.
And the expectations have changed. Plus, last year, they still finished third in the Big Ten East. That's not my opinion. That's where they finished. Third, okay? They still finished behind Ohio State, Michigan. And whether that's so that there's an expectation at 11-2, plus the bowl game they won, there are those who would say, like Narduzzi, that was kind of flimsy, but it is what it is.
Well, that's a weak argument then, because Michigan State was playing without a Heisman contender too.
Right, exactly.
And
I think they kind of cancel each other out.
I would agree.
I disagree with that completely.
Oh, I think
Michigan State ran the ball with the guys they had up and down the field on them.
On Pitt? No, they did not.
They ran it up and down the field.
They did not.
When they tried to run it with the guys they had, he's not Walker. He wasn't Walker. They scored 31 points in that game.
All through the air in the third and fourth quarter. I'll get you the numbers. They did not run the ball.
I'm just saying, I think Kenny Pickett made a big difference.
I'm sure he did.
But that's the way bowls work now.
Well, I agree.
If you're not in the playoff,
the way bowls are going to work now, when you play a bowl game, they lose their guys, we lose our guys. And that's going to continue. I think that trend's going to continue dramatically.
Until the playoff goes to 12 teams.
Tim, Michigan State ran the ball 36 times against Pitt in the Peach Bowl for 56 yards.
Yeah, but
put a 2 in front of the 56, and that's what you expect with Kenneth Walker in the game. I'm not saying one is necessarily worse than the other, but those are commensurate losses. Those are two Heisman contenders.
Well, there were other guys, too. Pitt lost its best safety in that game.
Oh, and they lost their second-string quarterback for, second drive of the game?
Yes. Now, I think that's critical. But the point is, Michigan State was not playing with a full deck. And
neither one of them were.
True. That's right.
Pitt was a defensive-first team with a excellent pass rush. And they were up in the third quarter. They had the lead, and they blew it in the fourth by giving up 3 touchdowns all through the air.
Well,
so
the one was the pick 6 at the end. Because that game, the game almost went Pitt's way anyway. What was it, Breck? 30 seconds to go.
And Cal Halliday had the pick
24-21 or whatever it was. And they're going in to win the game if this guy can possibly make a play. But Halliday made it, went the other way. So that kind of skewed the score the other way. But it's a W.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know why we're rehashing that. Pat Narduzzi would be happy we are. But the point I was trying to make is, I guess we all agreed. The standard has changed here just by virtue of the contract alone, which it should, because Michigan State didn't give Mel Tucker a 10-year, $95 million contract to continue to finish third in the Big Ten East or to win 8 games.
Or to go 8-4,
Yeah, there's an expectation of results. That's how it works. And then on top of that, look, yes, they finished third last year, and Mel Tucker said that on day one of fall camp this year. He said, we didn't win anything last year, which is true. But the problem is, and the reason the fan base is reacting so adversely to last week, besides the fact that the biggest problem that appeared on TV was the biggest problem all last year, and we were promised it was going to be cleaned up, was look what happened last year. Even though they finished third, they won some big games, including in week 3 on the road in a true Power 5 road environment at Miami. Didn't happen this time. Even after a week of hyping up all the preparation they were making to make the trip, and then for some reason only leaving the day before, that had to have something to do with it. I'm not sure how much. But anyway, we've got more time to talk about it. Let's take a break. We come back, we can reset the scoreboards for you. And
defensive keys, don't we?
I think we do that next, or do you want to do that right now? Let's do it next segment because we're up against it already.
Gotcha. You don't want to miss them.
Exactly.
Just like Jake Moody missed a 43-yard field goal from Michigan, it's still 13-10.
He missed that?
He missed a 43-yard field goal.
Speaking of missing defensive keys, I guess Michigan State missed them last week. Yikes.
By the way, State's at Maryland next week. Maryland's place kicker, Chad Ryland, leads the nation with 20 consecutive field goals made, including 2 today for Maryland of 52 and 53 yards. So if you get him next week where it's down to a kick and that guy's kicking, it looks like this guy's resume is pretty good.
Sure does.
It's still 13-10 Maryland, late first half against Michigan. Maryland.
Back in a few. Whitelaw PLLC Tailgate Show.
1240 WJIM Traffic Center. Driven by Shaheen Chevrolet and Cadillac. Relax and enjoy the Shaheen difference.
Taking a look at your traffic right now, things looking pretty good for the most part on the highways, although things are pretty crowded right around Trowbridge Road coming in from 127 and from 496. So motorists, be aware of that. Find an alternate route if you possibly can. And if you're coming in from the east on Grand River Avenue out by Meridian Mall in Okemos between Mohawk Road and Cornell Road, there's a single lane closure for another week or so. Find an alternate route if you possibly can get through all that mess. Weather-wise, overcast and 55 right now. It's going to be, the high temperature is going to be 64 degrees. There's going to be a chance of showers throughout the game. Whether that affects the game or not, who knows? The low temperature will be down into the mid-50s. Your travel update is brought to you by Shaheen Chevrolet and Cadillac. Relax and enjoy the Shaheen difference.
This is the White Law PLLC Tailgate Show on Lansing's Big Talker, 1240 WJIM and Classic Rock 94.9 MMQ. Today's broadcast is brought to you by White Law PLLC, Shaheen Chevrolet, Price Right Auto and RV, Blue Moon Belgian Wine. Now, let's talk to the Dean of Sports, Tim Staudt, and offensive-minded host, Beanie Howell from the Price Right Auto and RV Studios.
Welcome back, White Law PLLC Tailgate Show from those Price Right RV Studios here at 1240 WJIM, Lansing's Big Talker and Classic Rock 94.9 MMQ. Also brought to you by Blue Moon Belgian White, Shaheen Chevrolet and Cadillac, MSU Healthcare Sports Medicine, Doubting Industries, Schupan and Sons Recycling Industrial Services, Gravity Smokehouse, and the MSU Federal Credit Union. Hey, speaking of Gravity Smokehouse, I wanted to remind you that all season you need to make sure you head down to Gravity Smokehouse for your tailgating needs. Gravity is the official restaurant sponsor of the White Law PLLC Tailgate Show, keeping Lansing fed and full. Gravity's meats, they're smoked low and slow with scratch-made sides like mac and cheese baked to perfection with aged cheddar. Menu items like the brisket burger, 100% brisket, smashed burgers, and dry rubbed meats. You can't go wrong at Gravity Smokehouse, so get your tailgate catered from them all football season or catch the games at their restaurant off Cedar Street in Holt. Gravity Smokehouse, the official tailgate restaurant sponsor, White Law PLLC Tailgate Show. We appreciate them. Okay, we've reached the point in the show. We got to take care of a little business. Tim, why don't you tell us about today's defensive keys for Minnesota at Michigan State?
Today's defensive keys are brought to you by Gazelle Wealth Management. I think almost anybody could fill out the defensive keys for the game. All you had to do was watch the Spartans in the first three games so far this season, okay? Western Michigan and Akron at times threw the ball on Michigan State, but turnovers did both of them in, and the Spartans were able to win comfortably. But last week, the mistakes they made obviously were key. The one thing that is everybody's talking about with the defensive issues, I think linebacker play has got to improve as well. The linebackers have got to be both more effective getting to the quarterback and also protecting in pass coverage as well, especially in the short passes over the middle. Are those linebackers in the right position? Are they athletic enough to make plays? Everybody knows there's going to be some kind of change in the secondary today against Minnesota's established quarterback Tanner Morgan. He's a senior. He's got a lot of experience. He doesn't quite have the athleticism most people would suggest that Michael Penix did for Washington last week, but he's got a running game and he's got a veteran offensive line. Can Michigan State get a rush on him? Can Michigan State's defense avoid mistakes such as penalties or other issues that can make it easier? All of that is going to be the key. So to me, the key would absolutely go across the board. The defensive line, the linebackers have to play better with more accuracy. The secondary obviously has got to stick to those guys down the field much better, and there's got to be run support that's much better, and don't make hardly any mistakes. I mean, if you get into a game against a team that's undefeated with high expectations today, like Minnesota, I would say the defensive keys run across the board. And oh, by the way, the defensive players that come on the field, for whatever reason, to replace those who've been on the field, same thing. Are you going to be effective when you need it to stop drives and make the Gophers pump the ball away? Defensive keys have been brought to you by Gazelle Wealth Management. Gazelle takes a long-term view using prudent risk management. Call Joe Gazelle today. His area code is the same here, 517. And then it's 336-7200. Or visit Gazelle Wealth Management online at Gazelle, that's Gazall, gazellewealth.com. I can't pin that down anymore.
Thanks for that, Tim.
I don't
We
think it's
appreciate
just
it.
one single area. I think it's a team game. If there are 11 guys out there, those 11 guys have all got to play better and support each other, including the guy. And there can't be any personal fouls, can't be any pass interference. You know, we haven't talked about, I claim State has the greatest player in the nation at one position.
Oh, the punter.
Punter.
Bryce Behringer.
He's the best player in the nation as a punter.
He's excellent, and I've seen punters win games before.
I have too.
Low-scoring affairs, changing the field position. It's huge.
I mean, he changes it constantly. You think you've got him, State's pinned back. Okay, we're going to get it at the 40 or the 50. Oh, excuse me, the ball's back on the 28-yard line just like a kickoff.
And guys, looking at the weather, it could possibly rain during the game. Is that going to be a factor? Is that going to make the game lower scoring? That would make field position and punting more of a factor. I got a feeling it might.
All eyes are going to be on State's pass defense, right? For sure. That's going to be the big topic among media and fans. Here's where I am with the game, and you guys tell me, just kind of, you can just kind of wrap off of this. I feel like where this program is, with Mel Tucker as the head coach in year 3, and what we've seen them do last year, what we've seen they're capable of, that going on the road and getting embarrassed like they did at Washington, they're not going to come home and drop a game to Minnesota. That's just how I feel about it. Obviously giving away my pick a little bit, but I just don't think they're going to follow up that bad of a performance in the first truly poor one of the year with, a reprisal, losing at home to Minnesota, because I just don't think that'll happen. And here's why. Obviously, Michigan State's pass defense has some serious issues. But if they let Minnesota come in here, this is an offense that would make Jim Harbaugh blush with how much they want to run the ball and control the clock and not take a lot of chances down the field. If they let Tanner Morgan, who, God bless him, veteran, he's accomplished a lot there, going to go down as one of the best quarterbacks in Minnesota history.
Brandon,
but
I think you called him a game manager.
I didn't. That's what they call him. I wouldn't know. I don't watch a ton of Minnesota football.
I don't like game manager quarterbacks because subconsciously that means you stink, but you're the best guy we have, so don't lose the game for us.
Well, I don't necessarily think it means it stinks. I think it might mean that's what the coaches want. Like, I feel like a lot of Jim Tressel quarterbacks were game managers because he wanted to Tressel ball.
Craig Krenzel.
He wanted to run the hell out of the ball and not take chances so that they don't screw it up for the excellent defense, right? So, anyway, the point is Minnesota fans and media refer to Tanner Morgan as a game manager. I buy that. If Michigan State lets him come in here without his best receiver and he goes off for a career passing day, then this thing is at DEFCON 1, right? It just is. Like, there would have been no improvement from last year. It might, in fact, be worse. They can't let that happen. I just can't believe that that's going to happen.
Well, if it does, and then you're going to Maryland next week, and Maryland's pushed Michigan all over the field in the first half.
Michigan just scored. Blake Corum, 33-yard touchdown run. Michigan ahead 17-13 just before the half.
Well, that's big because that changes the momentum a little bit because Maryland is hung in there. If you missed all this, Maryland fumbled the opening kickoff, and Michigan scored one play left. Michigan led 8 seconds into the game and has struggled since then. So if they scored a touchdown right before they have to regain the lead, But it sounds to me like Maryland didn't come to lose.
No, and they've, the knock on them, and it appears the same thing is starting to happen now, is, they crush a bunch of non-Power 5 competition in the non-conference, put up 70 points a couple of times, even in years past, and then the Big Ten starts, and it comes crashing down to earth. Now, they're hanging in there more than they have today. But even last year, it was the same song and dance with them, and they threw all over the place on multiple Big Ten teams. That's just the kind of offense they run. So Michigan State's going to have his hands full dealing with that offense and Tua Tagovailoa's little brother.
No question.
Regardless of what happens today.
Regardless of what happens today.
Cowley, I think, is his first name.
They have another tough quarterback. He's like Penix. He runs the same way. He throws the same way. I don't know if his team's the same, whatever. I don't think the intensity in the Maryland Stadium is going to be anywhere close to what it was at Washington. But to your point, if Michigan State loses today going into that game, then all bets are off.
Yeah,
Then you can,
because the wheels are off the wagon for Michigan State if that happens. You're 2-2. They would have 2 losses before October, which I know people are going to get tired of hearing this.
What if Thorne's off today, though?
Yeah.
I mean, it's totally
He was
possible.
off against Western and Akron.
But hang on. If they go into October, I mean, it's not even October, and they have 2 losses already, that is simply unacceptable, and people get tired of hearing this, so be it. Tough.
Will you be giving up your season tickets?
It's unacceptable for a program that pays its head coach among the top 5 in the nation to have 2 losses before September's out.
Can you deduct his pay? When you say it's unacceptable, then what happens?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Tim always says that.
I say to Brock all the time, he says, well, that's not acceptable. I said, well, then what happens?
Well, do you
just
really
write more? Or, I mean, how does that
Yeah,
work?
Well, it's not
that's
really
gonna
up.
happen.
It's not up to me, but we know what will happen in the offseason. Michigan State will force him to make changes to his staff where the issues are. They will, because they're paying too much money.
Oh, if they for some reason go 7-5 or whatever, I think the fans are going to pretty much demand that changes are be made. For that reason,
7-5. If they lose today, 7-5 might be optimistic. And honest to God, I'm not doing a radio
Well, it
thing.
still
just
could
trying
be
to
even if they win today. It still could be.
True.
Look at this. If they go out of they go into October 2-2. Okay, they got to go to Maryland next week. They have problems against the pass, and Maryland likes to heave it all over the field. Then they have to bring Ohio State to town.
Who did they ever beat?
Wisconsin comes to town. Hey, maybe that's the safest one for Michigan State because of the way they
Wisconsin's
play.
kind of similar to Minnesota, actually.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like maybe they feel best about that one. Then you got to go to Michigan, right? And that's just October. Okay. So if they lose today, they're looking at a distinct possibility of, at worst, obviously 2-6, but maybe more likely 3-5. Certainly 4-4 is not unreasonable. Like, this is a big game. This is. And this is the kind of game that sets the tone for the entire balance of a season and sets up whether you're going to be in the conversation for a New Year's Six bowl game or you're going to be in the conversation for the Dollar General Bowl.
Well, I think a bigger question is if that happens, it's not so much will they survive October, will you survive October?
Well, that's a whole other issue. We'll talk about that some other time.
I mean, there's enough other issues on the table. I mean, if they're 3-5 in October, will you be 3-5 in October? It's like I always tell Brock, if nothing else, it's good for radio.
For sure.
Yeah.
But, dude, the deal is the expectations are different now than they've ever been. Even than they were under D'Antonio in the 3-year run where they finished top 5 at the end of every poll, like those years, 13, 14, and 15. It's different now. It's higher because Michigan State has started to invest in its football program like the top 5 or 10 programs in the country do.
But what does the Minnesota fan base say today? Where are they?
I think they're happy to be in this conversation. I think they'll be ecstatic with a win, obviously, and they got to feel good regardless because the Big Ten West appears to be wide open. Iowa can't score. Wisconsin doesn't have an offensive line for the second time in my life. I think that's only happened last year and this year. And Nebraska's in free fall. Northwestern's in free fall.
Purdue can't run the ball.
Right. So, I mean, you got to feel really damn good if you're Minnesota.
Illinois is a weird team. Northwestern isn't very good this year.
I think for Minnesota, it's going to, and this is just based off talking to the beat writer from the Star Tribune yesterday on my show. We talked about him earlier. Randy Johnson's his name. He does not throw a 94-mile-per-hour slider, though. Anyway, that was a baseball joke. Nothing? Okay. I'm here till Wednesday. Try the veal. So what I get the point being with Minnesota this year is they have to beat Iowa because they've never beat Iowa under Fleck. That's the bugaboo. They've beaten Minnesota as recently as Wisconsin.
If they're going to be more successful. I mean, they've never been.
If they're going to go to the Big Ten title game.
Yeah, I've never made the Big Ten title game, the Big Ten West. I think where
the Floyd of Rosedale doesn't get them going? The big bronze pig that they play for?
So my middle son is with us this week. And he's a Purdue guy. Big Purdue, right? So like he said...
He's been in a foul mood, hasn't he?
Well, like the Syracuse, yes. But, okay, so like he says, all right, we lost to Penn State. So we got one loss in the league. Wisconsin plays at Ohio State tonight. Is that a loss for the Badgers? Okay, Minnesota plays at Michigan State. Is that a loss for Minnesota? What happens if Iowa even gives you one early? In other words, the point he's making is even though Purdue lost its first conference game to Penn State, are they out of it? When you look at the West, like Illinois to me, I couldn't stand watching them play. They're better defensively, but when State, the only way they have a chance against Michigan State is State plays them on the road right after Michigan, and win or lose, it'll be a letdown game for Michigan State. Illinois is better defensively than it was by a long way, but they don't have a quarterback, and that'll probably be a problem long-term down the road. So if you take Nebraska, Northwestern, and Illinois out of the West, that leaves 4. Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Purdue. And you could pin 2 losses, so you might have 3 of them with a loss, plus whatever Iowa does at Rutgers. So if Iowa wins at Rutgers, at the end of the week, this week, Iowa probably by default, and we've seen where Iowa is, offensively and all the problems it's had, Iowa would be by default early on the leader in the West, but they've got huge games coming up too.
And look, that was excellent analysis and a breakdown of the Big Ten West.
You're welcome.
I think it's all for naught because it doesn't matter. Because the Big Ten West is 0-8 all-time in Big Ten title games.
And they'll be 0-9.
They will.
But
They're
at least you'll get there.
lamb.
But at least you'll get to go there.
Well, yeah, and Minnesota gets there. It's a huge deal because they've never been.
Do you get a Big Ten West title trophy?
Yes, you do.
There is a
yes, they do.
So there's a West trophy.
Yes.
Well, that's strong.
Hey, if you lose the last game of the season to get bumped out of going to the Big Ten title game and the team that beats you goes, you can still hang a banner for finishing as co-division leader. Well, just ask Jim Harbaugh because he did that.
If you're the Big Ten West title game fan base, you don't have to win to make money on them. Just cover. You can bet them in a cover, right? Because they're going to go in as about a 3 or 4 touchdown underdog. They always do. Whether it's Ohio State or Michigan or whatever. Michigan crushed Iowa last fall.
Yep.
And you got to figure Ohio State, if it gets there, would do the same.
Yes.
But
it's a sacrificial lamb.
But that's November. This is September. There are a lot of hassles to go yet.
A ton. And we've got one last break to go. We'll be back in a couple to close it out with you. Let's take a look at some of those spreads Tim's talking about today in just a few minutes here on the Whitelaw PLLC Tailgate Show.
1240 WJIM Traffic Center. Driven by Shaheen Chevrolet and Cadillac. Relax and enjoy the Shaheen difference.
Taking a look at your traffic, one final time, 69 westbound, a little bit slower than normal between M52 and Woodbury Road. That's because of the single-lane closure in that area. It's also a bit slow at the interchange, 127 and I-69. A little bit slower than normal in all directions. Be aware of that. And right around Trowbridge Road, coming off of 496 and 127 both directions, that's a mess right now. So find an alternate route if you possibly can. Taking a look at your weather. The temperature has gone up a couple of degrees. 58 degrees and overcast. There is a 40% chance of showers throughout the game. Whether that's a factor during the game, who knows? The high temperature will get up into the low to mid 60s during the game. Low temperatures down in the low to mid 50s tonight. Your game day travel update is brought to you by Shaheen Chevrolet and Cadillac. Relax and enjoy the Shaheen difference.
This is the Whitelaw PLLC Tailgate Show on Lansing's Big Talker, 1240 WJIM and Classic Rock 94.9 MMQ. Today's broadcast is brought to you by Whitelaw PLLC, Shaheen Chevrolet, Price Right Auto and RV, Blue Moon Belgian White. Now, let's talk to the Dean of Sports, Tim Staudt, and offensive-minded host, Beanie Howell from the Price Right Auto and RV Studios.
Welcome back. Whitelaw PLLC Tailgate Show on 1240 WJIM, Lansing's Big Talker and Classic Rock 94.9 MMQ, live from the Price Right RV Studios. Also brought to you by Blue Moon Belgian White, Shaheen Chevrolet and Cadillac, MSU Healthcare Sports Medicine, Doubting Industries, Schupan and Sons Recycling Industrial Services, Gravity Smokehouse, and MSU Federal Credit Union. Let's take a look at the top 25 scoreboard. Right now, number 1, Georgia's at halftime, leading Kent State. Surprisingly close, 26-13. Tim's upset. Doesn't look like the Bulldogs are going to cover, but there's time, Tim. Hang in there. In Ann Arbor, number 4, Michigan, in a also surprisingly close game, 17-13 lead over Maryland. Number 5, Clemson on the road at Wake Forest, up 20-14 at halftime. Central Michigan giving Penn State almost as much as they can handle. It's halftime in Happy Valley. CMU's only down 21-14. Number 17, Baylor in the third quarter at Iowa State, up 17-14. And the last top 25 game on right now, number 24, Pittsburgh, up 10 over Rhode Island at home. This is in the third quarter, 24-14. Now let's shift our attention a little bit here. We started talking about it a little bit at the last segment, but let's talk about some of these point spreads today. Because we can now, thanks to changes in the times. So Michigan State opened as a 1.5-point favorite, and that line has more than inverted now. Last I saw, Michigan State was getting 3.5 now from Minnesota. I'm going to make sure that's not changed. But Tim, your take on that? Do you like State getting 3 at all? I feel like it's a hell of a value, especially in this game.
I'd almost take State giving 6.5, 7, something like that. That doesn't mean I'd completely be sure they're going to win the game and cover. I got to see Minnesota on the road in a big game. I just got to do it. I just think going into Spartan Stadium and Michigan State's going to be motivated, clearly. I don't buy it. Now, would I be shocked if State lost outright? No. No. There's parity, but I got to see Minnesota take the next step, as they say, go to the next level. And the next level for them is to win a big game at Michigan State.
Yeah, I think in this game, with the way Minnesota wants to run the ball, if they can run the ball somewhat effectively, then you can throw off of it using play action pass. But Minnesota's tight end or tight ends plural be a factor in this game. If it starts raining in the game, which is a possibility, is that going to mess up the offense and make Minnesota go even more conservative?
Look, here's how I feel about Minnesota. Obviously, I think they're a good quality team. They won 9 games a year ago, 11-2 before that. They've got a Big Ten roster. PJ Fleck has certainly increased the talent profile of the team. Can he coach in game? I think the jury's kind of split on that so far. But here's where I am. Let's slow down. Like, I feel like there's a sort of paranoia setting in on the MSU fan base and somewhat the media too, because of what Michigan State looked like in Washington last week. But guys, this team doesn't have Michael Penix at quarterback, and also I know Minnesota's 3-0, but let's talk about who. New Mexico State, Western Illinois, and Colorado, a combined 0-9. Okay, this isn't like they just beat up on Western and CMU, who are like middle of the road to quality non-Power 5
Don't look
teams.
at me. I picked State. Brock picked State. You don't have to.
Well, we're going to give
us.
it's 156. We got to give our predictions here in the next minute or two.
Well, the world won't come to an end if we don't, but we all like State.
So let's talk about the number, though. It is now at 3. MSU getting 3 at home. If you were a betting man, which we know, Tim, you're
State.
not. You like that?
Yeah, I like State.
You like them to win straight up, though, right?
I just have to. I'm not sold on Minnesota.
Okay.
I'm not sold. I wasn't sold on Washington, and look what it did. So, but I'm not sold on Minnesota. Like you just said, New Mexico State, Western whoever, and Colorado.
0-9. Hey, their AD did a hell of a job scheduling. I'm serious. Like, I just still don't know why Michigan State scheduled the Washington game. You could be 3-0 right now, getting all the college football is big time style points kind of thing, like figure skating.
Hype.
Yeah. It's about appearance. But anyway, well, look, let's see how the nation feels. 58% of the bets of the betting public, people who have put tickets on this game, they're on Michigan State, and 55% of the money. So there you have it. Let's take a look at a couple of more that haven't already started. How about Ohio State tonight bringing in Wisconsin? It's only a 19-point spread. Does that surprise you? That seems light. That seems light to me for Wisconsin, who's having issues coming into the Horseshoe at night.
Well,
19?
Wisconsin has struggled
19.
to score, but Ohio State gave up 21 points to Toledo. So if Wisconsin can match what Toledo had, then Ohio State's got to get 40, but I think they're going to get 40.
Well, it's kind of...
They're tough to stop.
They are.
I think Wisconsin's too slow. Just too slow.
It's kind of the same as the 20 whatever Toledo scored. Seems to me a lot like the extra points State put on at the end of the
But
Washington
now watch
game.
Michigan go cover the 17-half against... the problem is it's the second half. The second half of these games changes off the first half in so many different ways.
True.
Which can help you or hurt you, one way or the other.
Exactly. All right, we got to get to picks,
No, hang
guys.
on. I wanted to get one more.
Quickly.
Number 20, Florida. At number 10, Tennessee. The Vols are given 10.5 in a series that they've lost 16 out of 17 and 5 straight in. The biggest spread in 25 years in this rivalry game.
Tennessee will have no trouble.
Covering 10.5?
No trouble.
They'll,
Rivalry
be,
game, man.
They'll be jacked up at Nayland. Yeah, I'd probably go with
No
that.
trouble.
All right, let's get to our picks now. Brock, why don't you lead us off? Minnesota at Michigan State. You don't have to give the point spread. Just what do you think
I got State winning 20-17. I think it's going to be more defensive than people think.
State 30-20.
Yeah, I'll go State. I'll go State 28-24.
I think the rain's going to. I think it's going to start raining during the game and then keep the score down.
I don't think it'll rain, but I think it's going to rain points, and I'll make it 30-20 State. It's not supposed to rain today.
If it does, well, I heard Andy Provenzano say last night it could in the third and fourth quarter.
Yeah, but it's updated.
Oh, well,
it's
sorry.
updated to just cloudy skies.
I don't have that direct
cloudy
line
skies.
in.
You don't need that rain slicker right now. You might tonight, but
Weather Alert 10 or whatever it's
there
called.
you go. Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for everyone for listening, for being here. It's the White Law PLLC Tailgate Show live from the Price Right RV Studios. Also brought to you by Blue Moon Belgian White, Shaheen Chevrolet and Cadillac, MSU Healthcare Sports Medicine, Doubting Industries, Schupan & Sons Recycling Industrial Services, Gravity Smokehouse, MSU Federal Credit Union, Dart Bank Mortgage Joe Sambear, Ameriprise Financial Craig Stiles, DBI We Do Office, High Caliber Karting and Entertainment, the Student Bookstore, the Nut House, and Gazelle Wealth Management. Back here next week, 12 to 2 for State at Maryland. Until then, go green.
Lansing's Big Talker, 1240 WJIM Lansing, and Classic Rock 94.9 WMMQ East Lansing, Town Square Media Stations.